Hey everybody, I'm John from Bike Fit Advisor. Today we're going to talk about chain rings that are not round. So I'm sure many of you have heard about non-round chain rings. They're also called asymmetric chain rings, oval chain rings, sometimes harmonic chain rings. I think even to some extent I've heard eccentric. I'm not sure that that's accurate or not, but the main idea behind these types of components is that chain ring essentially can be made larger when we're in our power phase and smaller effectively when we're not in our power phase. And this is done to just take advantage of the possible extra power we can generate during the downstroke and to minimize the amount of effort or the amount of negative impact that the recovery phase has on the pedal stroke. You'll also see it referred to as an attempt to eliminate the dead spots in our pedal stroke. When you first think about this, it seems that this would be a potentially very useful component change to make. But the big question is, do they help? Do these non-round chain rings improve a rider's efficiency, either from a mechanical or metabolic standpoint? So as with many things, the answer is not terribly simple. But the good news is that there is actually a fair amount of research looking into this, so we'll have plenty to parse through here. So let's go on and we'll dig a little deeper into this topic. So I decided to start with the manufacturers' websites, the manufacturers that make these non-round rings. And there's a number of them out there. I'm not going to go through everybody, but the first one we're going to look at here is Rotor. Now, I tend to skip all of the kind of the marketing jargon and try and really go into the website and see if they provide any actual research, whether it's in-house or research done elsewhere. You have to be careful with not mistaking actual research for marketing, and this is not simply restricted to the bike industry, of course. But, most companies are going to put out information that puts their product in the best light. For instance, aero wheel manufacturers, they'll often publish data on their wind tunnel testing where it shows that their wheel performed better than everybody else's. And they might, leave out the fact and put it in small type that it occurs at only certain yaw angles and things like that. So you do have to be careful with any of the research that is coming directly from a manufacturer. So I'm going to go quickly through this. I don't want to waste too much time on it. Rotor had 5 studies listed on their website, 5 links. And here's what I found. I went through all of them and read them all and took a kind of a deeper look at each of them. The first study is by far their best foot forward. It tests 8 fairly experienced male cyclists that are pretty young. The age range for these cyclists end up being between 19 and 24. And they tested them essentially over a 1 kilometer all-out effort to see whether they were faster and more efficient with round chain rings or with the rotor rings. And in a number of instances, they found benefit to the rotor rings. This was by far like I said, this was their best foot forward as far as the research goes. It was an okay study. It's a fairly narrow scope. You have to look at it and what it's telling us. It was only 8 subjects. The subjects, like I said, were fairly young and they were fairly advanced riders. I think it was required that they have a men's collegiate A racing license or a Cat 1 to Cat 3 racing license. And again, fairly young. And this is for a very short, very intense effort. So yes, it did show some improvement in certain areas. Does that mean it's automatically like, yes, these things work? It doesn't necessarily say that, because this is, again, we can only test these things in a fairly narrow range. So that's why we want a lot of research articles to kind of vet whether this is something that's good for maybe everybody, or is it just a very narrow slice? So again, the best we can draw from this study is that asymmetric rings might help you if you're very young, a very fit racer, and especially if you're kind of specializing or concerned about very short, intense efforts of about 1 kilometer or so. The next 4 studies provide us with significantly less. The second study relied completely on subjective reporting on how the rotor rings made the riders feel, whether they felt less pressure on their knees or they felt like there was more or less effort on their part. subjective studies are fine, but they just don't provide us with a whole bunch. The third study wasn't even published. It was just preliminary data from Francesco Concani, and it never made it to a study. It started to show, potentially point towards some benefit, but again, it was never really pursued after that. The fourth study was decent. It essentially studied the metabolic effects of the rotor rings during submaximal exercise. They measured heart rate, lactate concentration, and systolic blood pressure. There were definitely a few, things about to say. I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but there were a few issues within the results. I was unclear as to why they didn't explain why some of their data for the round chain rings sort of started off with, worse measurements at the very beginning of the test than the rotor rings. Why wouldn't they start at the same point, and then you could see how they progress from there with heart rate or lactate concentration? If you have more questions about this, or you want to see this in more in depth, you can go. I have a article on my website. I'll link it below, and it goes into more depth here, and I show you the more, you can see the charts a little more closely and take a look and kind of understand what I'm saying. And there may be a really good excuse for it. However, there was nothing in the research article that explained it. And then finally, the fifth study isn't actually even a research paper. It's really more of a training journal. It documents a single rider riding the same, I believe, 30-kilometer course, and documents their average heart rate and their average speed, essentially, how quickly they covered the course. And they covered the same 30-kilometer course for many days in a row, alternating between round and non-round. And again, I'm not dismissing that could potentially be good data, but it's also, again, it's not necessarily research. So then I moved on to the Asymmetric website. They're also a manufacturer of oval chain rings or non-round chain rings. And they had listed on their 4 studies. The first link took me to one. It was really poorly translated. It was apparently in a different language. I think it was French, and it was really badly translated into English. And so it was really difficult to even discern what was going on in the article. Again, not saying that it's a bad article. It was just also there was not a whole bunch of useful information in that. And then actually the next 3 links to other studies, which they didn't actually cite the studies, they just had a title on there, so you couldn't go and look them up any other way, is the links were broken. It didn't take you anywhere. So not much help there on the Asymmetric website. So this is why I decided to dig through the research that was available. This is by no means comprehensive, but I did go through, did a pretty significant PubMed search, and I also went to the Medicine and Cycling research database and pulled every article that they could that they listed for asymmetric or non-round chain rings. So I found really 8 good studies. There were a few that I excluded because they weren't really testing what we thought they were testing. But of the 8 studies, 6 found no significant difference between the round chain rings and the oval chain rings. Now, it would take way too much to go into each of these articles individually. And I can't provide you links to the entire article because I don't want to violate any publishing rights or anything like that. But I do have links in the website article, which I'll link below. I have links to at least all of the abstracts, and then you can track down the articles as I did from there. So I should note that the 2 studies that found a benefit to the oval chain rings, one did test on non-cyclists, so that's actually a good sign, meaning that potentially you don't have to be an experienced cyclist only to benefit from these. Maybe, we'll see. And then the other one also tested, and it was a separate study, but also tested a very short, intense 1-kilometer all-out effort amongst track specialists. And so again, we kind of have some cohesion there, you might say, between one of the articles I found and the main article listed by Rotor that really showed that, if it's a short, intense effort, they could actually benefit you. So again, you can go take a look at all of those and see, read them for yourself and see what you think. Here is what I think based on what I've read. So do I think that the asymmetric chain rings help? And unfortunately, the very unsatisfying answer of maybe is probably most appropriate. So based on my read of the literature, I would say that the more experienced a cyclist you are, the more high effort riding and racing that you do, and perhaps if you partake in reasonably short and intense races, for instance, then an asymmetric chainring might actually help. It should be noted that there probably is a learning curve. I know I'll probably get that question about, well, if you spent more time on the chainrings, you'd get better at them. And actually, the research that I did go through showed this, that there is a learning curve, but it's actually fairly short in that you shouldn't expect to become drastically more efficient on them after, say, 3 months of training with them versus, say, even just a 3-week break-in period. It seems that short break-in period seems to kind of get you all the benefits that you're going to get if you see any. Now, the flip side to all this is, I think, and again, this is just my read of the literature, but if you're a cyclist that doesn't ride very aggressively, or you don't race, and you spend most of your times in submaximal training zones, then I think your chances of benefiting from an asymmetric chainring are fairly limited. Now, I do think it's important to note here that even though we do have a fair bit of research on this, and I would say that in general the preponderance of the research says that no, they don't seem to, there doesn't seem to be a significant a benefit to them. But I would still accept that, again, each rider is very individual. There's going to be probably some benefit to some riders over others, and some will, for instance, some you might say absorb the use of them a little better. But I think if it were me, I would probably be skipping it myself. You might come to a different decision. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you ridden these before? They've been around forever. I mean, they started, or probably even before then. There are instances, but the old BioPace from Shimano, which is back, I think, in the late 80s or early 90s when we first began to see those. So they've been around forever. Many of you may have had a chance to ride on something that's, again, non-round. Let me know what you think, what your experience was. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please check out some of my other videos, and I really appreciate everyone that's subscribed. If you like these types of videos, I've been doing a couple of these a week now, and I'm really enjoying it. So I hope to keep doing it. I appreciate all of the support out there, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.